My sister Amanda stood at the front of the room, surrounded by a carefully curated crowd of friends, colleagues, and extended family holding the small, unassuming box I had brought. She lifted it between her fingers as if it were some fragile, ridiculous thing, tilting it playfully for her audience. A sharp, knowing smile tugged at her lips. "This one's from my sister," she announced, her voice sweet but soaked in condescension. Then with a casual shrug she added, "She can't even afford diapers. But hey, let's see what she managed." Laughter followed like a reflex, polite from some, sharp from others. My mother Barbara laughed the loudest, her high-pitched cackle slicing through the air like glass shattering on marble. In that moment I could feel every inch of myself shrink. My cheeks burned hot, a stark contrast to how cold my fingers had suddenly become. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And when I glanced sideways, there was my son Ethan, just 8 years old, staring up at me from his seat. His eyes were wide with confusion, a mixture of hurt and something that looked dangerously close to fear. I wanted to disappear. Every instinct screamed at me to grab his coat, to walk out of that suffocating room before the weight of humiliation crushed me entirely. I reached down, fingers curling toward his jacket. But Ethan moved first. Without a word, without seeking my permission, he stood, small but steady. He reached beneath the table and retrieved his backpack, slinging it over his tiny shoulder with a determination that stunned me. Then, with a quiet resolve, he walked toward the front of the room, straight-backed, head high, as if the entire audience didn't exist. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Conversations faltered. A few heads turned curious. Slowly, the chatter drained out until the only sound was the soft shuffle of Ethan's sneakers against the polished floor. He reached the gift table, the one buried under towering stacks of glittering high-end packages, and placed his own small offering beside them. A plain, brown-wrapped box that looked almost comically out of place. Then, with the room holding its collective breath, Ethan looked up at Amanda. His voice, though soft, carried through the stunned silence with unwavering clarity. "This is from my mom," he said, glancing back at me with eyes far older than his 8 years. "And it's from Grandpa, too." The stillness that followed was absolute. Amanda froze, her confident posture faltering. Barbara's smug smile faltered into something brittle. The energy in the room shifted, no longer buoyed by champagne giggles and polite applause. For the first time all afternoon, every eye turned not to Amanda, not to the expensive gifts, but to Ethan, and to me. In that instant, everything changed. But before I tell you what was inside that box and why it mattered more than any gift money could buy, let me take you back to where it all started. Stories like this, the quiet, messy ones about family love and standing up when it's hard, they don't always get the loudest applause. But they matter. If this moment resonates with you, if you've ever found yourself in a room where you felt small, your support means the world. A simple like or subscribing to the channel helps more than you know. It tells these stories they're worth being heard. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I was never supposed to be the mother. That was the narrative whispered behind hands, passed along through tight-lipped conversations. Not because I was reckless or wild or even too young, but because in everyone's mind, Rachel Bennett was not the picture of motherhood. That role belonged to Amanda, the golden child, the one who followed the script. She was always the pretty one, the polished one, the sister who made the right choices. College graduate, marketing degree in hand, prestigious job, downtown husband who wore loafers without socks because real estate guys don't need laces. And now, of course, pregnant, perfectly timed, perfectly presented in a life wrapped with a designer bow. And then there was me. I had Ethan when I was 23. His father vanished before we even left the hospital. No surprise there. I raised Ethan on my own, piecing together a life from the scraps they all pretended not to see. Days spent cleaning houses, nights stocking shelves at the grocery store, no family to lean on, certainly not my mother. Barbara had labeled me early on the daughter who needed fixing, the one perpetually one step away from disaster. I learned quickly that asking her for help was an exercise in self-humiliation, so I stopped. The only person who had ever truly seen me was my father, Thomas Bennett. He wasn't a loud man, he didn't need to be. His support came in quiet, unwavering acts, fixing a leaky faucet before I even noticed it was broken. Teaching Ethan how to hammer nails into old scrap wood, calling him Little Chief with a smile that said everything words couldn't. He never made speeches about being proud of me. He didn't have to. I felt it, every single time he showed up. He passed away last year, cancer stealing him from us inch by inch. And even now, the grief lingers like a shadow. Some days I still catch myself reaching for my phone, ready to send him a photo of Ethan's latest school project before reality crashes back in. So when Amanda announced her pregnancy and sent out glossy invitations for a baby shower embossed, of course my feelings were complicated. I was happy for her. I wanted to believe that. She was still my sister, despite the sharp edges. There was a part of me that hoped attending would be a step back toward family, toward something that resembled belonging. I wasn't naive enough to expect warmth, but I certainly hadn't braced myself for cruelty. Ethan, however, was thrilled. His innocence shielded him from the subtext. He asked if we could bring a gift. I told him we would, though I had no idea how I'd make that happen. Our budget didn't have room for luxuries. But tucked away in a storage bin, I had a soft blanket I had crocheted when Ethan was a baby. Still pristine, still beautiful. I washed it carefully, folded it with precision, and wrapped it with plain but neat paper. I added a handwritten note, simple and sincere. It wasn't from a high-end registry, but it was a piece of my heart. The day of the shower, Ethan wore his best, a button-down shirt, and his nicest khakis. I pulled on my cleanest blouse and favorite jeans. We took the city bus, bouncing along streets that grew fancier the further we traveled. The venue was an event hall, glass walls, gleaming floral arrangements that probably cost more than my rent. The air smelled like money and mimosas. When we arrived, no one paid much attention. Amanda was in her element, radiant in her designer maternity dress, basking in the attention of tall women in high heels, who laughed at all the right moments. My mother stood near the food table, glass of something expensive in hand. She waved us over without warmth, offered a tight smile as her eyes flicked to our modest gift bag. "Oh, how sweet," she said, her tone flat dismissive. Ethan hugged her. She ruffled his hair as if that sufficed already, half turning back to her conversation. We found seats at a small side table away from the main buzz. I poured Ethan some punch, watching as the room carried on oblivious. I kept reminding myself we weren't here for them. We were here for Amanda. When it came time to open gifts, the attention shifted back to her. Applause and exaggerated oohs accompanied every bottle warmer, every deluxe diaper bag. And then she reached for our box. I saw it in her face, that little curl of her lip, the smile I knew too well. "This one's from my sister," she announced, lifting the box lightly. "She can't even afford diapers, but let's see what she managed." The words hit like a slap. Laughter followed, rising in waves. My mother's cackle was the sharpest. I sat frozen. Embarrassment washed over me in dizzying waves, crawling up my neck, flushing my face with heat. Beside me, Ethan watched confusion shifting into something more complex, more painful. I forced a smile for him. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered. "Let's get ready to go." But Ethan didn't move. Instead, with a calmness that shook me, he reached into his backpack. At first, I assumed it was a drawing, maybe a toy he wanted to distract himself with. I had no idea what he was about to do. No clue that he had been quietly holding on to something far more powerful than I realized. And I certainly didn't know that my 8-year-old son, standing barely tall enough to see over the table, was about to change the entire course of that day. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan rise from his chair, his movements slow but purposeful, imbued with a quiet determination that didn't belong to an 8-year-old, or perhaps belonged only to those who had seen too much too soon. He reached into his worn backpack, fingers closing around a small plain box, wrapped hastily in brown paper, the edges crinkled and uneven. It was an object that looked painfully out of place amidst the gleaming towers of glittering gifts, gifts wrapped in foil and satin ribbons, gifts that screamed significance because of their price tags. And yet there was something about the simplicity of that box, clutched in my son's small hands, that commanded more presence than all the polished offerings combined. I whispered his name under my breath, my voice trembling with a plea, but Ethan didn't even flinch. He walked forward with a steadiness I barely recognized, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to ripple across the room like a spreading crack in glass. The chatter dulled into fragmented whispers, then slipped into silence as one by one heads turned to follow his path. Even Amanda, mid-laugh, faltered as her eyes landed on her nephew, confusion flitting across her face like a shadow. Beside her, my mother Barbara tilted her head, offering Ethan a tight, puzzled smile, the kind adults give when they expect a child to do something cute or mildly embarrassing. But Ethan had no interest in playing their game. He reached the gift table, dwarfed by the towering presents, and with a quiet grace that belied his age, placed his humble package among the extravagant offerings. Then, standing straight and sure, he looked up at Amanda and said, in a voice soft yet unwavering, "This is from my mom, and it's from Grandpa, too." The silence that followed was not the comfortable quiet of a satisfied audience. It was sharp, suspended, as if the very walls of the venue leaned in to listen. Amanda's confident poise faltered. Her lips parted perhaps to form another dismissive quip, but no sound emerged. My mother's smile vanished, her mouth tightening into a thin line. I stood too instinctively, my legs moving before my mind could catch up my impulse to protect Ethan, roaring louder than the din of humiliation still ringing in my ears. Yet something rooted me in place, a quiet voice within urging me to wait, to watch. Amanda's gaze dropped to the small, oddly wrapped box. For a moment she hesitated, the weight of the room pressing down on her. But eventually curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, compelled her fingers to reach for it. She peeled back the paper, the crinkle of the brown wrap deafening in the hushed room. Beneath the plain exterior rested a piece of folded stationery and an old silver rattle tarnished with age, but glinting softly in the light as though holding its breath. It was a relic from a time when gifts weren't judged by the stores they came from, but by the stories they carried. Amanda lifted the rattle, confusion knitting her brows. Then she unfolded the letter. As her eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, her composure cracked, subtly at first, a soft quiver of her lips, a fluttering of her lashes. My mother leaned in curiosity, overtaking her discomfort, peering over Amanda's shoulder to read. The letter was unmistakably in my father's hand. The realization struck me like a sudden blow to the chest. That rattle, that letter, I hadn't seen them since the somber day we packed up Thomas Bennett's belongings after his funeral. I had assumed they were tucked away in storage, maybe even discarded. I had no idea Ethan had kept them. No idea he had planned this. Barbara's voice, once sharp and cutting, was uncharacteristically soft as she began to read aloud. To my next grandchild, she began, her voice hitching on the word next, betraying an emotion she likely hadn't anticipated. A ripple of discomfort stirred through the room. People shifted chairs, creaked, but no one dared interrupt. "I may not be around to meet you," she continued, her tone faltering but steady, "but I wanted to give you something. This rattle has been in our family for 3 generations. I gave it to my daughter Rachel when she had her son. Now it's yours." Amanda's hands lowered slowly, her fingers tightening around the rattle knuckles, pale. The letter, trembling slightly in Barbara's grasp, held the room hostage. Family isn't about who has the biggest house or the most money. It's about who shows up, who sacrifices, who forgives. I hope when you grow up you treat people with kindness, no matter what they have or don't have. You'll learn soon enough gifts come in many forms. When the final words settled into the air, the silence was so profound that even the low hum of the air conditioning felt intrusive. Amanda stood motionless, pale, her breath shallow. Barbara blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening, though her face remained stoic. Across the room, guests who had once filled the air with laughter now sat silent, their gazes lowered, unsure of where to look. Ethan turned to me then. His eyes, so open, so achingly brave, met mine. I tried to smile, but my lips felt stiff, my throat constricted. My hands, trembling now, pressed against my sides to keep from reaching for him. I had brought a humble blanket to a room adorned with luxury. But my son, in his quiet wisdom, had brought something no registry could contain: our history, our heart, our truth. I didn't know what to do next. Should I apologize? Should I gather Ethan and leave with whatever dignity we could salvage? The questions tumbled through my mind, but before I could act, Amanda surprised me. She stepped out from behind the table and walked toward Ethan, slowly, deliberately. Then in front of everyone, she knelt down and wrapped her arms around him. Not a polite embrace, not a performance for the crowd. A real hug, firm, human, heavy with words left unsaid. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't know he left something like this. I didn't know." Ethan gave a small nod, his expression unreadable, and then, without drama, walked back to me. As he approached, I crouched, drawing him into my arms. And when I held him, it was as though something inside me, something dammed up for far too long, cracked open. Not in a way that hurt, but in a way that finally let light in. There was no applause, no sudden outburst of reconciliation, just a gradual quiet shift. Conversations resumed, but softer. There was a strange, fragile peace in the air, like a storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean. I hadn't come to this shower expecting respect. Honestly, I had only hoped to avoid humiliation. But Ethan, my sweet, observant son, had reminded everyone, including me, of what it means to show up with love, even when the world refuses to make room for you. After the letter was read, and Ethan had done what none of the adults had dared, I sat there feeling the ground beneath me shift. I was no longer embarrassed, no longer angry. I was simply stunned. Because while I had been so busy surviving, so consumed with the daily grind of keeping us afloat, my son had been watching, quietly absorbing, learning not how to endure but how to protect. His small act of defiance was not just for me, it was for us. As the tension drained from the room, leaving behind an uneasy but healing quiet, I pulled Ethan close. He leaned into me without a word, his small head resting against my shoulder, his breath warm and steady. I should have been proud, and I was. But beneath the swelling pride nestled quietly within the folds of my chest was something unexpected guilt. Not born from wrongdoing, but from a stark realization. I had spent so much of my life surviving, so much time keeping my head above water, that I had forgotten what else we carried. In my relentless focus on endurance, I had underestimated not only myself, but Ethan too. He had reminded me in a room full of people who measured worth in dollars and appearances, that value isn't proven by the shine of a gift bag or the polish of a perfect image. Our worth had been there all along, in the quiet acts of love, in the history we held in the heart, we carried so effortlessly, yet had learned to hide. As the room began to stir again, conversations tiptoeing back into existence, my mind drifted back to the rattle, to that letter, to the things I thought we had packed away forever when we boxed up my father's room. That day lingered sharp in my memory, my mother's clipped silence, Amanda's hasty exit, the heavy air of avoidance. It had been Ethan, small and steady, who helped me carry those pieces of my father's life to the garage. I never noticed what Ethan had taken with him, never thought to ask, and he never told me. It wasn't until that evening, long after the awkward murmurs of the baby shower had faded, that I found the courage to ask him. We were in his room. He sat cross-legged on his bed, dressed in pajamas, 2 sizes too big, a stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent and bubblegum toothpaste. I perched on the edge of his bed, trying to keep my voice even. "Why didn't you tell me you were bringing that gift?" I asked gently. He looked at me with those wide, earnest eyes. And in that moment, I swear he seemed far older than his 8 years. "Because you always give people everything, Mom," he said simply. "And they don't see it. I wanted them to see it this time." The words struck me deeper than any insult I had ever endured. I didn't cry then. Instead, I leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the top of his head, breathing in the faint scent of his shampoo, and stayed with him until sleep pulled his small body into stillness. But his words echoed through me long after. That night, I found myself sifting through old photo albums and brittle newspaper clippings, fingers brushing over faded ink and crumpled edges. Buried within those pages were my father's scribbled notes, little affirmations in the margins, doodles on scraps of envelopes, my name written more times than I could count. Evidence that I had mattered, that I had always mattered even when the rest of the world failed to see it. By morning, a quiet decision had settled within me. I was done hiding, done shrinking, done pretending that their indifference didn't hurt. For myself, for Ethan, it was time to show up differently. That afternoon, I called my mother. Barbara answered with her usual efficiency, her voice clipped, guarded. For a moment, I hesitated, then I spoke. "I wanted to thank you," I said, surprising even myself, "for reading Dad's letter yesterday." There was a pause, not long, but heavy, with the weight of words she wasn't used to choosing carefully. I didn't know, he wrote, that she admitted, her tone softer, now thinner, as if the memory itself had worn down her edges. "I didn't either," I said quietly, "but he did, and Ethan saved it." Another pause, and then barely above a whisper, "He's a good boy." "He is," I agreed, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. "And I'm doing my best to raise him right." "I know," she said. It was the first time in years those words felt like a recognition, not an obligation. I wasn't naive enough to believe that everything had changed in an instant. Barbara wasn't about to become the mother I had long wished for, the kind who apologized, who reached out first, who said the hard things out loud. But something had shifted. My father's words had reached her. Maybe for the first time she saw me as he had. Later that week, Amanda sent a text. No emojis, no forced exclamation points, just simple words. I kept Dad's letter and the rattle on the baby's dresser. Thank you. I didn't press for more. That was enough, for now. But something was different. I felt it in the way I stood taller and how my eyes met their reflections head on. Not because Barbara had given me permission, not because Amanda had extended an olive branch, but because Ethan had shown me what I had forgotten who I was, where I came from, and that the love we carry, even when it's wrapped in plain brown paper, has a weight no amount of laughter can diminish. When Amanda reached out again just a few days after the shower, I wasn't sure how to feel. She asked if I could come over. No pretense, no flattery, just a plain message with a time and an address. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Years of being the one who tried, who bridged the distance, had left me tired. Tired of being the one to initiate, to walk into rooms where my presence felt like an inconvenience. But this felt different, not a demand, an invitation. So I said yes. Ethan came with me. When we arrived, Amanda's apartment greeted us with the warm scent of cinnamon and vanilla, a deliberate softness that I had never associated with her before. Baby clothes were folded neatly on the couch. A crib stood against the far wall, assembled and ready. And on the dresser near the window where soft light pooled, sat the rattle. Beside it, framed with care, was my father's letter, positioned not as decor, but as something sacred. Amanda opened the door, offering Ethan a small, genuine smile. Then she looked at me. "Can we talk privately?" she asked. Ethan nodded, understanding without explanation, and wandered into the kitchen where her husband busied himself with hot chocolate. Amanda led me into the nursery. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands fidgeting, twisting nervously. For a while, she said nothing. The silence hummed, punctuated only by the low murmur of the heater and the faint, sweet scent of baby lotion. Finally, her voice, small but steady, broke the stillness. "I was cruel at the shower," she admitted. "I meant it as a joke, but I knew it would sting. That was the point." I said nothing, choosing instead to let her sit with her own words. She exhaled a long, shaky breath. "I've been jealous of you, Rachel. I never said it before because it sounded ridiculous even to me. Everyone always said I was the one who had it all together, the smart one, the successful one. But you raised a child who would walk into a room full of strangers, speak from his heart, and make grown adults stop and think. That doesn't come from luck. That comes from you." Her confession settled between us, raw and unpolished. My throat tightened. I glanced toward the dresser, toward that letter, toward the tangible echo of a man who had loved us both, even if we hadn't always seen it the same way. "When Dad passed," Amanda continued, her voice trembling, I shut down. "I couldn't admit how much I needed him. I think I hurt you more because of it. I tried to pretend he never favored anyone. But he did. He favored you. And I hated that. Because deep down I knew you earned it." I stepped forward, my feet moving before the words formed. "I never wanted to compete with you," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "I just wanted us to be sisters." Amanda nodded, her eyes glistening as she blinked against the tears threatening to fall. "I don't want to compete anymore either." And in that moment, sitting in a softly lit nursery, with the scent of new beginnings in the air, something between us, fragile but real, began to heal. We sat in Amanda's nursery, surrounded by soft light and the hush of expectation, yet no words passed between us for a long while. And yet that silence, for once, was not hollow. It was full, rich with all the things that had gone unsaid for years, a shared stillness that acknowledged hurt without demanding apology. When Amanda finally spoke, her voice was quiet but deliberate. "Would it be all right," she asked, glancing not at me but at the framed letter resting near the window, "if I told the baby about Dad? Not just the rattle, but everything. The way he used to sneak candy to Ethan. How he'd show up at parent-teacher nights when you couldn't get off work. The bedtime stories in that ridiculous pirate voice." Her words landed gently, like a hand extended across an old wound. I nodded. "Yes, of course," I said, my voice soft but steady. "He would have wanted that." When we rejoined the living room, the atmosphere had shifted. Ethan sat curled into the corner of Amanda's pristine white couch, a large mug of hot chocolate cradled in his small hands. A smudge of cocoa sat beneath his nose, giving him an accidental milk mustache. Amanda knelt in front of him, the careful poise of the afternoon gone, replaced by something warmer, something real. You know, she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard, when your cousin is born. I'm going to tell them about you, about how brave you were, about how much you love your mom. Ethan's lips curved into a small, shy smile. He nodded, accepting her words not as flattery, but as simple truth. Later on, the bus ride home, as the city lights blurred into hazy streaks against the darkened windows, Ethan's quiet question broke through the hum of the engine. Is Aunt Amanda still mad? I smiled, though it ached. No, sweetheart, I said. I think she finally sees things for what they are. It wasn't really about the letter or the rattle. It was about what they represent. Our family's history, our love, our pain, our worth. It was a reminder that dignity doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how you carry yourself, especially when no one's watching. Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent to the small revelations unfolding in the glow of that bus. But in my heart, a weight I hadn't fully acknowledged began to lift. I could almost hear my father's voice, warm and quiet, telling me, "You did good, kid." For the first time in a long while, I believed it. In the weeks that followed, a subtle but undeniable shift unfolded between Amanda and me. We didn't become best friends overnight. There were no heart emojis, no daily texts. But the sharp edge of competition that had once undercut every conversation dulled. The air between us became less tense, less fragile. A week later, Amanda invited Ethan and me to a family dinner at my mother's house. At first, I hesitated. The weight of old humiliations clung to that dining room like dust on glass. But Ethan's hopeful face reminded me showing up wasn't just about forgiving them. It was about claiming my place on my own terms. So we went. We brought a homemade lasagna the way Dad used to make it. I didn't dress up, but I wore what made me feel good. Comfortable, whole. When we arrived, Barbara was setting the table. For a moment our eyes met, and in that moment something softened. She smiled. Not the thin, strained smile of social performance, but a real one. "You cooked," I teased gently. She set down the silverware, straightened up, and said, "You inspired me. You always did more, with less." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and quietly helped her with the last few plates. Dinner wasn't perfect. Conversations stumbled, people tried too hard, and silences sometimes stretched longer than necessary. But there was laughter too, moments of ease. And when Ethan leaned toward Barbara, chattering about his science project, I watched as she listened, really listened. Later, as we washed dishes side by side, Ethan asked, "Are we a real family now?" His question hit harder than any insult ever had. I crouched down to his level, brushing his hair back gently. "We always were, kiddo." But now I think they're finally starting to see it too. For years I had carried a shame that was never mine to bear. Measured my worth by yardsticks designed to keep me small. It's easy to believe you're failing when the world rewards what glitters, when it confuses success with surface. But what I had learned, what Ethan had reminded me, is that real love doesn't announce itself with price tags or applause. It's found in the quiet, persistent acts, in presence, in sacrifice, in choosing to show up again and again, even when it's hard. My father knew that. He had taught me not through grand speeches, but through his steady hands and steadfast heart. The rattle and the letter weren't just heirlooms, they were his legacy. His quiet insistence that love is measured by how we hold each other up, not by what we can display in a glass case. In the weeks after the shower, Amanda and I talked more. Tentative at first, careful, but honest in a way we had never been. She asked questions about my life, real questions. She showed up to Ethan's school play with her husband, cheered him on, took us out for ice cream afterward. It wasn't effortless, but it was honest. Barbara, too, had changed in subtle ways. She softened around Ethan, asked about my day without the clipped tone of obligation. Sometimes she still said things that stung, but I learned to call it out, and surprisingly she listened. But the biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. I stopped apologizing for who I was. I stopped shrinking in rooms that had made me feel small for so long. I no longer carried that voice that whispered I was falling short. Because if my son, with all his innocence, his clarity, his brave, unwavering heart, could see my worth so easily, then I owed it to him, and to myself, to believe it too. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered that moment, that crowded room, Amanda's mocking laugh, Barbara's smirk, and then Ethan's small figure standing tall, walking forward, speaking for both of us when my own voice failed. That was the moment everything changed. Because love doesn't need to be loud, it doesn't need to be dressed up in expensive wrapping, it only needs to be real. Sometimes the smallest gift wrapped in plain brown paper carries the deepest legacy. So to every single mom who's ever felt overlooked, to anyone who's been laughed at for not having enough, to anyone who's measured themselves against impossible standards, hear me now. You are enough. You have always been enough. And sometimes it takes a child's voice to remind the world just how powerful quiet love can be. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been underestimated, or if you've had someone who believed in you when no one else did, I invite you to stay with me a little longer. Click like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that dig deep into the messy, beautiful truth of family forgiveness and growth, subscribe to this channel. Your stories matter. You are seen. You are valued.